You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and it's time again to dive into some more defensive rankings in the NFL. And today, I am focusing on the AFC North. We're coming off the heels of my NFC North rankings that I did a few days ago, and there was a lot of conversation to be had in that comment section. So I invite you all to do the same here. Comment down below. Let me hear your thoughts, your opinions on the AFC North's defenses. Where do you think they're going to rank from worst to first within that division here? What do you disagree with? What do you agree with coming from my end of things? And let me hear from you all. But as we do, we'll start with number 4. We'll work our way up to the top. And at the number 4 spot, and I'm sorry to do this to you all, but I have the Cincinnati Bengals sitting at the bottom of the division here. And I don't want to sit here and say it was clear and cut to put Cincinnati at number 4, but when you look at the struggles that this team dealt with last year, and I know a lot of it had to probably do with the fact that you lost Joe Burrow 10 games into the season, this is a team that has a lot of work to be done. And I know that Lou Anarumo is praised for his adjusting and how he handles adversity on the defensive side of things, but this is a defense that, when you look at the numbers here, ranked 28th in passing yards per game, 26th in rushing yards per game, 21st in points per game. They were 22nd on third downs. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to get things back in order here. But I do think that with Joe Burrow back in the fold, this defense probably has a little bit more gas in the tank and a little bit more to play for. And coupled with a more consistent offense always helps out the defense be more consistent as well. There is definitely a lot to look forward to. It's just one of those, I'm going to have to see it to believe it type of deals here. Plenty of work needs to be done. If there is a positive you want to pull out of last season, despite all the bad, they were one of the better red zone defenses in the league, sitting at 11th. So it's not like everything was not great, but a lot of things were not. Now, when you look at kind of the changes being made to this defense coming in this next season here, back end of the secondary is definitely the big highlight here. Von Bell making his return to Cincinnati after a one-year stint in Carolina. I do really like this addition back into the defense here. Von Bell excelled under Lou Anarumo back when he was here a couple years prior. So I do think that this is a very welcome addition, especially after losing Jesse Bates as well. Getting a guy that's familiar with what you're doing in the secondary on the back end side of things. It's always great to have a guy like him come back into the fold here. Doesn't need to really relearn a lot because it's something he's very familiar with. You also have Geno Stone coming in from the Baltimore Ravens, leading the league in interceptions last season, slated to start opposite of Von Bell. So this is where the real changes are going to start to come into play here. Obviously, Von Bell, knowing what this system is all about here, I'll be curious to see how he looks and how Geno Stone looks as a pair together. Obviously, Von Bell, we know what he looked like when Jesse Bates was around, but how do things look with Geno Stone now basically playing opposite of him here? And also, Geno Stone was not necessarily the guy at safety for Baltimore. Yes, he was one of the guys, but I mean, the lead safety pair over there has always been, or at least as of late, was Marcus Williams and, of course, Kyle Hamilton. But Geno Stone was that guy who stepped up and played that third safety role extremely well. So I'm curious to see now how he fares as like a guy amongst the guys in the secondary there. You also lost a big leader in DJ Reader here in the middle of the defensive line. Sheldon Rankins, though, is the addition to the defense to help mitigate that loss here. And honestly, a pretty good guy to come bring in because he's coming off of arguably his, the second best season in his career. So basically, since 2018, he has 6 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, and 37 total tackles coming out of last season here. So I do think that, yes, you lost DJ Reader in the middle here, but you're bringing in someone who is coming off of arguably his best season in quite some time. So not a bad time to bring someone like him in here to mitigate that loss in Reader. And then you doubled down on the interior as well, got a little bit younger, brought some youthful talent in here, spending second and third round selections on Chris Jenkins Jr. and McKinley Jackson respectively. So there are some really nice additions to this defense here, but not a large ton of changes here. A lot of it is just simply retool in a few areas of need as the secondary did struggle against the pass. And of course, you're hoping that your defensive front can get a little bit tighter with some of this youth being brought in and changes being made here against the run. But overall, a very similar defense to last year. It's just a matter of now this team has something to play for with Joe Burrow and the offense hopefully playing a lot better than where they were in the tail end of the season following the loss of Joe Burrow. I do think that there's going to be improvement for this defense. And honestly, any improvement is going to be welcome coming off of last season here. And I genuinely do think that Burrow back in the fold is going to make a difference for this team altogether, because a consistent offense always helps out the defense. On top of that, I love the bringing back of Von Bell. I think that this is one of those like necessary type of things to help try to stabilize the back end of the secondary, because losing Jesse Bates is clearly not necessarily the best thing for this defense at this point in time here. So bringing a guy like Von Bell who knows the system back is a good thing for you. And again, the upside is certainly there. It's a exciting like possibility of getting a guy like Geno Stone, who clearly excelled in the role he played in Baltimore, coming in to play for Cincinnati now. But it's just a matter of, is he going to do well as like the guy in the back end of that defense now? But it's the defensive line that really just has to step up and get things going for them. Being middle of the pack in sacks, in pressures, and near the bottom of the league in tackles for loss, you got to pick up the play here and get more aggressive. So I have them at number 4 for right now. Obviously, you never know where things could go, but on paper at this point in time, I put them at the bottom. Now, coming in at number 3, and this is where it gets very difficult in my opinion. There was a lot of flip-flopping back and forth. I want to make it very clear that it is very close amongst the other 3 teams, in my opinion, as to who has the best defense. And if anyone's sitting here going, no, it's not close, my favorite team's defense is the best, you're full of it. The reality is that 3 through 1 is a very real conversation, and there is an argument for any one of those 3 teams to potentially be there by the time the season rolls around and comes season's end. But I decided, because I'm somewhat anticipating a bit of a regression because of what we saw during the tail end of the season, to go with the Cleveland Browns. And I'm sure I'm going to hear it from you all fans, but it's fine, because hear me out at least, please. Jim Schwartz and what his defense did last year, obviously a very legendary run early on in the season, but there definitely was a little bit of a drop off as you got later into the season here. But there is plenty to gush about and to talk about and praise. You have arguably the most dominant defensive front in the NFL right now, and you added to it on top of that. But I mean, you finished last year 6th in sacks. You were 1st in tackles for loss. You made a ton of quarterbacks' lives hell during the season here. But on top of that, there were also some things that you struggled with, like allowing people into the end zone, ranked as the worst red zone defense in the NFL, and you were sitting middle of the pack in terms of points per game allowed at number 13. But this was an excellent defense nonetheless. I mean, you literally finished the season with the lowest yards per game allowed by nearly 20 yards. So it's not like it wasn't a great performance from season start to season's end, but it was not the same defense at the season start as it was come the season end. There was definitely a little bit of a drop-off. When you look at the numbers there, 5 of the 7 highest point totals that the Cleveland Browns allowed came in Week 10 and after. And you could say the same thing about the yardage totals as well. As the season wore on, the defense kind of came back down to earth a little bit, I guess you could say. Now, do I think that there's going to be some massive fall off and regression in Cleveland? Absolutely not. I expect this defense to be pretty good and potentially sit somewhere along the lines of what this defense was towards the end of the season, which is still a very good defense, just not the legendary type of area that they were flirting with during the first 6-7 weeks of the season here. And they did a good job of mitigating their losses as well. Obviously, Anthony Walker, no longer a part of the team. In comes linebacker Jordan Hicks. This is a guy that is as consistent as they come, 100 tackles a year kind of guy. He missed some time in 2023, yes, but before that, hadn't missed any games since 2018. So, I mean, this is a guy that you can basically lock in for 100 tackles, and you know he's probably going to be there for just about every single game, give or take maybe a game or two if some injury issues do pop up. But he's a guy that is playing if he is able to. On top of that, you went and brought in linebacker Devin Bush as well. This is a fun signing and one that I'm looking forward to seeing how it takes shape. This is a guy that's an incredible athlete, but just has not quite been able to put it all together on the football field. But I'll be curious to see how he fares in the linebacking room over in Cleveland now. And there were some great depth additions added to the defensive line. And this is where that conversation of arguably most dominant defensive line in the NFL becomes less of an argument and more of it's probably the Cleveland Browns, because you brought in defensive tackle Quentin Jefferson to add to the fray, and this is a guy that has 26.5 career sacks during his time. You also went and took a second-round pick selection on defensive tackle Mike Hall Jr. So the defensive line is deep, and I mean deep, over there in Cleveland. And again, I need to reiterate this, because it's not like the gap is big between 3-2-1 within this division here. This is an extremely challenging group to rank, but I think that for me, there was that dip in play late in the season for Cleveland, and I think what we saw from them towards the end of the season is more a reality of what the defense actually is. And like you saw what happened going into that game against Houston, and yes, you can blame the turnover issues with Joe Flacco, something that I was talking about prior to that playoff game but got told I was wrong about. Some of the turnover issues probably led to some of that regression in the defense here. So the truth is somewhere in the middle here. Do I think they're the legendary unit from the first 6-7 weeks of the year? Most likely not. The likelihood of that happening again is not really there, and history shows that. But do I think that they're the team that's allowing 45 points to Houston in the playoffs? Probably not as well. The truth is somewhere in between, where I think this is going to be a really good defense here. It's just a matter of where they are going to be. But with that, moving into the number 2 spot now, again, this only gets more difficult here. I spent a lot of time trying to decide where I wanted to settle on it, but I am going to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers at number 2. Terrell Austin has his work cut out for him, but I will say that he is probably the biggest benefactor in this division of this past offseason with what the Steelers have done to this defense to make sure that they are ready to go and contend this year. Despite what was a bit of an offensive implosion last season, and it felt like the offense was doing more bad than good last year, the defense was not a problem at all, and I think that's one of those things that you really have to heap some praise on to Pittsburgh for because of that. When an offense is 3 and out, turnover, or just can't even get more than like 6 plays in a single drive, you typically look on the other side of the football field, and the defense is typically struggling as well. However, despite all that, despite Pittsburgh being tied for 27th in plays per drive last season, 23rd in total offensive plays per game, 23rd in average time on offense, this was still a defense that was 7th in points per game. They were one of the better red zone defenses in the NFL. And if the offense can just improve, even let's say 5 to 10 places within those different statistics that I just rattled off there, this is a defense that could take another step forward and really be a devastating unit for opponents to deal with. And when you look at what they did with the changes here, this is probably some of my favorite additions to any team defensively in the NFL right now, because I'm a big fan of all the players they brought in here. Patrick Queen, I can't believe he's not in Baltimore. That's all I've got to say about that. Ravens fans, I can understand you're probably hurt and upset, and more so now that he's in Pittsburgh. I cannot believe the Ravens let him go and let him go away. I understand you have Raekwon Smith and you have someone behind Patrick Queen that is going to be stepping up and taking his place, and we'll talk about him in a second, but I just can't believe he's not in Baltimore anymore. And for Pittsburgh to just swoop in and snag him, I mean, great pickup here. A guy that's averaging over 100 tackles a season. He can drop back in coverage. He can play sideline to sideline, get after the quarterback. He can plug up the running lanes. Like, do it all guy, upgrading what has been a position of need for the last few years on the interior of the defense, and this is like a home run hit for them. Couple that with bringing in someone like Dante Jackson, not afraid to tackle. He's a ball hawk. Yes, he didn't have any interceptions last year, but he has 14 total career interceptions. When he's playing well, he's able to go after the football and bring it to the house potentially. Then you also have the addition of safety Deshaun Elliott, who is slated to start opposite of Minkah Fitzpatrick, and obviously having a healthy Minkah Fitzpatrick this season, who missed 7 games last year, should be a boon for this defense as well. I do really like that pairing because I do look at Deshaun Elliott as an upgrade over what you were kind of dealing with at the safety position last year when Minkah Fitz was in and who was playing opposite of him, and ultimately when you were missing him out as well. So I do think that when I look at the big additions to this defense here, coupled with some of the depth changes as well, Pittsburgh has made some of the better moves, in my opinion, amongst a lot of teams. They didn't rely too much on free agency, but they identified, these are a few spots of need that need significant upgrades, and based off player performance, I do think are legitimate upgrades. And despite the fact that, this defense did let teams move, like when you look at their yardage total numbers, by no means are they really pretty numbers. 21st in total yards per game allowed. It wasn't pretty, but when teams got to the red zone, they were shutting those teams down, and that's the type of stuff that I like to see there. They were 10th in sack rate, 10th in sacks, 10th in pressures. If you could just get a little bit of better coverage from the secondary with the additions that they've made there, plus Patrick Queen, again, a guy who's able to, A, get after the quarterback, but he can also drop back into coverage himself. I do think that this team ends up being potentially even better than what they were last year defensively. And to flip over and look at the offensive side of things, I really do think that the offense is going to significantly benefit from having a guy like Russell Wilson under center over there. I know there are some people that are doubting Russell Wilson and where he is in his career right now, but last year was not bad for him. He finished with a 66% completion rate, a 26 touchdown to 8 interception ratio. Last season was not bad for him. Denver was bad. I don't really think I would say, and this is somebody who, that first year in Denver, I was saying, oh my God, Russell Wilson's cooked, and all the memes and whatnot, but he was not bad last year. He was pretty good, all things considered, with what was going on in Denver. If the offense can pick it up, the defense is only going to benefit, and I think that this unit could get even scarier. And that's a scary thought considering where I think Pittsburgh's defense is currently sitting at now, just on paper, never mind if the offense can pick it up and help them out a little bit and not force them to play from behind so much. And then, of course, sitting at the number 1 spot at the top of the mountain of the AFC North, despite the fact that they are working with a new defensive coordinator in Zach Orr, there is a standard of defense in Baltimore, and it is one that I have personally grown up watching as I am 28 years old, going on 29. When I first started watching the NFL back in like 2004, 2005, whenever it was around then, I feel like I have consistently seen great Ravens defense, and I would honestly be shocked to see anything really different at any given season here. Zach Orr taking over for Mike Macdonald. Obviously, there is the concern of how does that change things within the defense. I can't imagine that things are going to change that drastically. This is still John Harbaugh's team, and there is still a standard that he has had set since he ended up coming in back in, 2007, 2008. I don't really think that's going to change, and him being a guy that has played linebacker in Baltimore and understands what it takes to be a part of one of those defenses, and ultimately he had his career cut short due to injury, but was somebody who was a stud that I hate to see have his career end the way it did. I think he understands and gets the expectations of what needs to happen in Baltimore here. And this was a team that was first in points per game last season. They were first in takeaways. That could obviously change. I feel like takeaways being one of the more volatile stats. Probably not going to be first next season, but I expect with how aggressive this defense is, they're probably going to be somewhere within the top 10, and I think that's still a good place to be if you're not at first. You were 6th in total yards allowed. In the midst of a little bit of a youth movement right now, with recent draftees kind of stepping in and taking over the last few years for some veterans that have been allowed to walk, I'm not really anticipating too much of a drop-off. Yes, there are some things to look at, like the big loss of Patrick Queen. That is going to be significant here, but apparently Baltimore believes in Trenton Simpson, their 2023 third-round pick, so he's going to have some big shoes to fill. But I think that with a guy like Roquan Smith, being able to take him under his wing, Patrick Queen's game, I think, took another step having Roquan Smith playing in tandem with him. So I think Trenton Simpson could definitely see some of that as well. But that is obviously a big question mark that we need to look at here. You also had Jadeveon Clowney and Geno Smith departing as well. But like I said earlier, Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton are the lead guys in the back end of that secondary. Geno Stone, I kind of looked at as the number 3 guy. So I'm curious to see who steps up into that number 3 spot there. But it's not something that I'm sitting here going, oh my God, what's the back of the secondary going to look like minus Geno Stone? They still have Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton, 2 very capable guys in the back end of that defense. Kyle Hamilton ascending every single week, it feels like, when I see him stepping onto the football field as one of the top safeties in the NFL right now. The other question, obviously, playing opposite of Odafe Oweh. Kyle Van Noy is currently slated to play opposite of him with 9 sacks in 2023. Obviously, the Ravens felt like they were all right letting Jadeveon Clowney go. He was never really a sack machine anyways. He was more of just a guy that generated pressure for the other guys that were surrounding him. And there's also some intriguing guys behind him. You have David Ojabo, who has been dealing with injuries the last couple of years. He's only played in 5 games the last 2 seasons, but I would love to see him actually be able to be on the football field, because he's one of those guys that is an extremely talented dude. He just hasn't been healthy. So hopefully that can sort itself out. You have a 3rd-round pick in Adisa Isaac as well. So there's a lot of intrigue going on as to who are going to be who's the main guy that's going to be playing opposite of Odafe Oweh the entire season. And then secondary depth will be nice as well. You got a healthy Marlon Humphrey back, who missed 7 games last year. You went and spent a first-round pick on Nate Wiggins, who I think is going to feast in that secondary. You have a 4th-round pick in TJ Tampa as well. There is a lot to really like about the incoming guys that are going to be stepping into starting roles here. And I think we're going to have ourselves another dominant Baltimore Ravens defense here. Like I said, consistently a top 10 unit every single year. It feels like that I have watched the NFL myself personally. I can't really remember a time where the Ravens defense wasn't at least middle of the pack, if not better. And I mean, they were top 5 when I was doing my research for these rankings here. They were top 5 in so many statistical categories on the defensive side of things. There's no way that losing, and again, important player to what they were doing last year, don't get me wrong, in Patrick Queen, but you're not going to tell me that Patrick Queen, like, departing and Jadeveon Clowney and Geno Stone are going to result in this being arguably one of the best defenses in the NFL last season to a team that's middle of the NFL. Like that, it just, between the yardage numbers, the yards per attempt numbers, conversion rates, sacks, tackles for loss, if Baltimore falls off a cliff, I would probably have to eat my shoe, because I don't think I don't anticipate that, and I'd be pretty shocked to see it. So, and I'm not a Ravens fan. I feel like that's also something I need to say, and I kind of wish I said before I started saying this, because I'm not a Ravens fan. I'm not a fan of anyone in this division. This is just me talking what I personally think, and I would just be legitimately shocked to see much of a drop-off from this defense going into the 2024 season. But those are my rankings going into 2024 for the AFC North. Let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts, your opinions. Where would you rank the teams? What are your thoughts on my rankings? All of that, would love to discuss. But that is it for me. As always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I will see you all next time. Have a good one.